This week, we find ourselves deep in the jungles of Laos in 1970, where a medic spent 4 straight days fighting, crawling, bleeding, and saving lives when everyone else thought they were done for. This is the story of the Special Forces medic who redefined what it means to never quit. His name was Gary Mike Rose. Gary Michael Rose was born in Watertown, New York in 1947. When he was young, his family moved out to Southern California where he spent most of his youth. He graduated from high school in 1965, right in time for the draft to start breathing down everyone's necks.
Tonight, for the first time in 27 years, the United States has again started a draft lottery.
But Rose didn't want to wait to be told what to do. His father had been a Marine in World War II, and he gave Mike some simple advice. If you volunteer, you pick your destiny. If you wait, Uncle Sam does it for you. So that's exactly what he did. In 1967, he walked into the recruiting office and enlisted in the United States Army on his own terms. After basic and infantry training at Fort Gordon, Rose crossed paths with a Green Beret instructor who apparently saw something in him. He had Mike take a test that ended up changing his entire life. By the time he finished his initial training, he was on orders for airborne school at Fort Benning and then to Fort Bragg, home of the United States Army Special Forces. Now, the Special Forces medical course back then wasn't a joke. It still isn't. It's one of the most challenging programs the Army has to offer. See, Special Forces has a wildly unique role within military doctrine. They are unconventional warfare specialists.
What do you mean by that?
They send in small units of highly trained operators to build, train, and command indigenous personnel to overthrow oppressors, wherever that may be. I want you to think about that for a second from a medic's perspective. Contrary to conventional units, where higher echelons of care are typically close behind the front lines, SF medics have to be ready to set up medical aid in an area that likely has no outlet to establish medical facilities. When you're stirring up a rebellion in someone's backyard, it's not advised to just walk into their hospitals and yell, "Time out," and ransack their medical cabinets. It blows the whole cool guy vibe. So these guys had to be a soldier, a scientist, and a surgeon all under one silly green hat. And so their medical training had to reflect this. It was layered. First came the 91 Alpha basic medic instruction. Then 91 Bravo was an advanced course at Fort Sam Houston down in San Antonio. And finally, a long stint of OJT in real Army hospitals. Students rotated through emergency rooms, labs, various intensive care units, and even dental clinics, often working nights and weekends just to get more time in the ER. They weren't just handing out Motrin either. They were performing minor surgeries, setting compound fractures, pulling teeth, and diagnosing tropical diseases, all skills they need to use in the jungles, miles from any doctor. Then came AMTS, or Advanced Medical Training School, which included another 7 weeks of training at Fort Bragg. This included Dog Lab. Now, look, I'm not going to dive into the particulars of what all Dog Lab entailed, but personally, I believe live tissue training is some of the best training you can get outside of treating a human patient. Innumerable lives have been saved due to realistic training, and that's all I'll say about that for now. After that, it was boards. I think every unit has their version of boards, and they're always the most intensive part of qualifying. There's no glossing over a subject or gaming a test when you have a panel of your peers grading you. Once you passed, you were done with the formal medical training within the SF pipeline. Phase 2 consisted of additional training for all SF candidates, including schools such as Escape and Evasion. When they finally graduated, they earned the title of Green Beret. So, when Mike Rose finally completed that brutal year plus of training, he was ready to go. He first served with the 7th Special Forces. They were deployed out to Thailand, training Thai border police and local medics. But everyone, including Mike, had their eyes on Vietnam. By 1970, he volunteered for a transfer to Vietnam, and more specifically, to a covert unit most Americans wouldn't even hear about for another 30 years, MACV-SOG. MACV-SOG, the Military Advisory Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, one of those names that sounds like a research lab but really means something else entirely. Their mission was deep penetration reconnaissance and cross-border raids into Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam, areas where US troops technically weren't supposed to be operating. These teams were small, often just a handful of Americans, a 1-0 as the team lead, a 1-1 as the assistant team lead, and potentially a few other specialists, leading dozens of indigenous Montagnard fighters. The odds were rarely in their favor. These missions went far beyond conventional warfare. They changed uniforms, tactics, weapons, hygiene, and even diets to blend in and survive. They went in with little promise of rescue if things went sideways, and they usually did. It was into this environment that Gary Mike Rose arrived. On September 11th, 1970, Rose and a team of 16 Americans with around 120 Montagnard commandos loaded into CH-53 Sea Stallions and lifted off towards southeastern Laos. Their mission? Disrupt North Vietnamese supply lines and divert pressure from a struggling CIA operation nearby. It sounded straightforward until they crossed the border. The flight in was rough. Ground fire started as soon as they crossed into Laos and didn't really stop for the 45-minute transit. Rose noticed pre-mission that men had already started packing more ammunition than food or water. Never a really comforting sign when you're the medic. So what he did was what any good doc would do. He passed out extra morphine syrettes just in case things got ugly, and spoiler alert, they did. When they arrived, air assets hit their target fast, destroying a major NBA logistics hub. Unfortunately, success came with attention. A lot of it. Apparently, they enjoyed their stay so much that they extended it from roughly 36 hours to 4 straight days of heavy fighting because of the amount of ground fire that they were encountering. Some people just like their jobs a little too much, I guess. Rose spent those days crawling, patching, and dragging teammates while taking shrapnel himself. At one point, wounded and using a stick as a crutch, he kept moving between patients under fire. He improvised stretchers from ponchos and bamboo. He reused morphine syrettes between patients, which is not ideal, but it was either sharing the pain meds or watched people go into shock. He gave just enough to dull the pain, not so much that they couldn't walk. That's one of those lessons that every medic learns eventually. Sometimes the hardest part isn't saving someone, it's keeping them functional when comfortable isn't an option. When I started, I liked the idea of being a drug 'em till they drool kind of medic. One that everybody likes. But maturing into the role requires that you understand what the realities of combat medicine means. And sometimes that reality is that your patient with a new hole somewhere in his body still needs to think, move, and operate his primary weapon all on his own. Rose later joked that by the second day, he was basically running a mobile trauma ward on the move. He patched holes, stopped bleeds, and kept men alive long enough to keep fighting. Rinse and repeat, and continued on for 4 days. The night movements were brutal. Pitch black, thick jungle, with constant fire. Try moving 100+ people, many wounded, through that kind of terrain without radios and actually make it work. I mean, I've done swamp night movements with modern comms and night vision and still lost people. I mean, for a minute or two, and we find them eventually. But these guys had none of that. By the 4th day, their situation was beyond bad. The enemy was pounding away with nearly a battalion's worth of troops closing in. When the extraction finally came, it wasn't exactly clean. The landing zone was still hot, and Rose had no medical gear left. He dropped his aid bag and helped fight to secure the LZ. They packed the first bird with wounded, and then some. By some miracle, it made it off the ground. The second bird came in under fire. Rose kept working, helping load casualties and taking rounds nearby. Finally, he jumped onto the last bird out, one that apparently had already taken a hit on the way in, had lost one engine, and on the way out lost the other, so it went down hard. Listen to this clip real quick about him talk about the moments right before the crash. I love how calm he is after everything that he had just been through.
He's talking to Covey, and he goes like, Hey, I'm at 4,500 feet, no hydraulics, engines are both dead. We're going down. He was talking to him like he was ordering a pizza. So Bernie Bright and I are sitting in the tail, and the engine goes dead. And I'll tell you, when you're in a helicopter and that engine quits, you don't know how quiet it gets. Oh my God. And the helicopter kept going this, and you'd see the ground, then you'd see blue sky. Kept doing one of these numbers. One of us said, you know, we're gonna crash. And Bernie says, yeah, we're arm in arm, just watching the scenery, you know, the trees and the sky. Beautiful day, it really was.
Luckily, Rose was thrown clear. But are we done yet? No. He got up, grabbed whoever could still stand, and went back into the burning wreckage to pull others out. Out of roughly 130 men, nearly everyone made it back. 3 Montagnard soldiers died under his care and were left behind, something Rose carries heavily and will for the rest of his life. You can hear it in his interviews. It's a responsibility every medic carries, but in a situation like this, you have to understand that those 3 souls saved thousands of lives.
Vietnam. We so interrupted their operations that they held back almost 55,000 infantry to guard their rural echelon areas, which were originally intended to go south to fight the American units. And I'm thinking, well, you know, how many more names would be on that wall?
Because the operation took place in Laos, it was classified for decades. Rose received the Distinguished Service Cross, but couldn't even tell his wife what he had really done. The story stayed buried until 2017, when his award was finally upgraded. Nearly 50 years later, he stood in the White House as President Trump presented him with the Medal of Honor. It took half a century for the paperwork to catch up with what his team already knew. Stories like Gary Rose are part of why modern 18 Delta pipelines exist. Vietnam forced innovation. SOG medics had to adapt to an environment that the Army had not fought in for decades, working out of a ruck that had to survive everything Vietnam threw at it. Their M5 aid bags were loaded with IV fluids, antibiotics, suture kits, everything that could make the difference between life and death. But there's only so much you can carry when you're fighting and moving at the same time. One of my favorite quotes that Rose has is when he said,
in my unit, I owned your left breast pocket. That's where I would grab the supplies.
Meaning the medic dictated exactly where every team member's medical gear went. It might sound controlling, but it's about efficiency under fire. When seconds count, you can't be guessing where somebody keeps their tourniquet and pull out a box of cigarettes instead, or in my generation's version, a can of Copenhagen Long Cut. Today's medics still argue about kit placement, and every unit is a little different. You can use chest or belt-mounted IFAKs. The left breast pocket isn't available for most units today because of modern body armor. I always preferred mine accessible with both hands and in plain sight. I think that sentiment is mostly universal, but it still leaves room for modification as needed. Also, I never liked camo tourniquets. They just blend in way too easy, and it's so easy to overlook them. I had a love-hate relationship with the butt IFAKs, if you will. They're streamlined and out of the way, a little too out of the way sometimes, if I'm being completely honest. I always consider patient movement to be deliberate, and log rolling a patient just to get to essential gear seems counterproductive. In training, I used to make the guys playing the patient land on their backs so medics could practice getting into their own gear under pressure. Don't even try if somebody's hit in a military vehicle. Normally, injured personnel would grab their own kit, and if they were unconscious, well, I'm going to be needing something a little bit more invasive than the IFAK is stocked for anyways, so I just jump into my own bag. This is an example of my own kit, running it right off the back. They're made really easy. They have the release right in there. Just reach around, pull it out. Brings the whole thing out in one punch, and you just rip it out the bottom. Now I vacuum sealed everything that I wanted to carry, and it does a good job. The real revolution, though, came from the air. Helicopter evacuation changed combat medicine forever. Now, during the Korean War, the military had experimented with air evac using helicopters. Bell H-13 Sioux and Hiller H-23 Raven could transport 2 patients via externally mounted litters. The Vietnam War drastically expanded on this, with the use of UH-1s or Hueys and other large aircraft. I was reading through the book Dust Off for further research on this episode, and if you want a fantastic insight into the development of earlier aeronautical medical evacuation with all of its successes and failures, I highly recommend it. Paperback is on Amazon, and the link is down in the description. Dust Off is a call sign known by every medic nowadays, but in the 60s and 70s, this tactic was still being developed. At the onset of the Vietnam War, the US Army was still throwing together the air ambulance battalions. 1st Cav, made popular by the movie We Were Soldiers, was only established in 1962. An air ambulance platoon initially consisted of 12 Hueys, with additional platforms later being incorporated. Medics could get patients to higher care quicker than ever before in history. This changed the role of the medic forever, but not without its challenges. Medevac has never been a simple task. Many casualties died en route due to the inability to treat. Luckily, altitude was not a huge issue during this time due to the helicopters flying relatively low. It wasn't glamorous work. Many of those pilots and medics flew unarmed, hovering over firefights to pull people out. But it built in the foundation for medevac and cadovac systems that we still use today. Still, units like SOG couldn't always rely on helicopters. They operated too far behind enemy lines. And that meant using what we now call prolonged field care. Ironically, modern special operations medicine has come full circle. PFC is discussed more and more as we prepare for areas with denied airspace. We're refining techniques today that these Vietnam medics had to invent out of necessity. They pioneered the Stabo harness for jungle extractions, early IV resuscitation under fire, en route treatment during movement, triage systems. These were the building blocks of modern special operations medicine. When you see a modern combat medic today, whether it's a Green Beret on an ODA, a Ranger platoon medic, or a PJ pulling somebody out of a crash site, you're looking at a legacy that traces straight back to Vietnam. A lot of what we take for granted in modern battlefield medicine, our SOPs, our kit layouts, evacuation standards, all started with men like Mike Rose and the SOG medics who learned by doing, and often by paying the ultimate price. This episode isn't just about one man's Medal of Honor. It's about the medics who built the standards that we still live by, and the organizations that keep their legacy alive. This brings me to the jersey I'm wearing for this episode. This isn't just a lacrosse jersey. The logo you see isn't just for show. Each year, Army Green Berets and Navy SEALs face off in a lacrosse match that's part competition and part camaraderie, and is quickly building into a tradition centered on the idea that the mission doesn't end when the deployment does. For this episode, I'm dedicating it to the Green Beret Foundation. They've invested millions directly into supporting the Special Forces community, helping operators and their families through recovery, transition, and loss. It's an organization built by people who understand the sacrifices they have made and work diligently to support them. The physical wounds heal. The unseen ones take time, community, and purpose. The foundation helps make sure those men and their families aren't fighting that battle alone. If you'd like to support them, you can find the link in the description. Even a small donation helps, and yeah, I know it's Army, but that's alright. Every service has its tribe, and we've all shared the same dirt at some point or another. I'll be highlighting the Green Beret Foundation and the Navy SEAL Foundation in future episodes, because they're both doing incredible work. But tonight, this one belongs to the Green Berets, and to the medics who brought life into the darkest corners of the jungle. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm the Longship Medic. Stay safe, stay ready. I'll see you in the next one. Sorry. Doesn't end when the deployment does. And part